You're listening or watching the Church Answers podcast. My name is Tom Rayner, and if you have been listening or watching the previous two podcasts, since we've dropped three in the same day, you have been listening or watching Pat Nemmers. And we've been talking about content that is in his book, Retractions. I love the subtitle, Cultivating Humility After Humiliation. You can get that book just by going to the link and clicking on there. We ended the story. I asked Pat specifically if he would share the story of his wife's death. Now, he has remarried, and he has a blessed union and lots of kids and a lot of grandkids, and things are going very well with him. But I wanted you to hear that story. We ended it with the death of his wife, how she died suddenly in his arms, and how he told his oldest child, his daughter, 14 years old, that mommy was dead at 3 a.m. I felt like because of time constraints, we finished prematurely, and I did not want to be too succinct that we just really forget the moment. And so we're going to use the rest of this time to finish that story, but we're also going to talk about, I call it how a church is reaching people with the gospel in the middle of nowhere. I hope I'm not offending anybody in Iowa when I say that. But Pat, welcome back. We're glad to have you.
Glad to be back, Tom.
Well, our friends at Belay, they're our productivity experts. You can get someone from Belay just by contacting them at belaysolutions.com. And whatever type of position you want, they're likely to have it. And they take care of all the work for you. They do everything for you. They're your HR. They're your hiring person. They do all of that. And they're great folks. So go to Belay, go look at belaysolutions.com. And also, they're making a gift available for you, the eBook, The Power of Productivity. And you can get it by texting Tom at 55123. Once again, if you don't know how weirdly I spell my name, it's THOM at 55123. Pat, let's pick up. So where we were, and I'm just going to ask the listener and the viewer to go back and watch or hear the episode again. They need to. It's brief. Let's go back. Your wife has died. You told, first of all, your oldest child at the time, a 14-year-old. Then you told your other children. If I'm recalling correctly, 7 children. Is that right?
Correct.
7 children, 14 down. And then you talked about how God, in essence, was challenging you to show how his grace can be sufficient to you in such a time as this. I want you to feel comfortable finishing that story, but I also want to save a little bit of time talking about what God is doing at your church now, so they'll know where you are from that moment.
I think we can do both. It's just, again, the premise of that book is cultivating humility after humiliation. So my humiliating circumstances was the death of my wife. And if all things work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. The thing that I think we struggle with is the word together, because together is good, bad, heart, evil, all kinds of things. But God is ultimately trying to work his good out, right? Mm-hmm. So what good was it for me? There were several things. I would say to all of your listeners, nothing replaces the truth of God in those moments of tragedy and hurt. And 2 days later, I was in Psalm 71, having read 69, on the day that my wife died. Psalm 71, verse 20 says, and I remember, Tom, like it was yesterday when I'd read this many times, but this time it was just for me. It says, you who have shown me great and severe troubles shall revive me again and bring me up again from the depths of the earth. And I didn't know how God was going to do it, but I believed that. And he would do it through the saints, through the church, through my own personal sanctification. Because what was God doing when he took my wife away? One of the things, and I mentioned this in the book, is he revealed to me I was not as compassionate as I thought I was. I lacked compassion in my life. And I just said it. I was a pastor. I'd led people to death's door. I'd buried babies. I'd done all kinds of things that require compassion. And I think I had a level of it, but not anything close to what God wanted to cultivate in my life. And it took nothing less than the death of my wife to reveal some of those things to me. And so besides that, God's people, the church gathered around me. They were very encouraging, gave me plenty of time to come out of this. But I was a young guy. I was in my 30s, and I didn't want to wait forever to come back and preach. I only took about a month and a half. My very first message, though, was titled "When Your Theology Comes to Bear." That is when you got to start living it out. And God willing, I'm still doing that today.
Well, from that moment at that church, talk about the transition to get you to today and what's going on at your current church. Because once again, Retractions by Pat Nemmers, and he has mentioned the subtitle, which is really tells you a lot about the title itself, Cultivating Humility After Humiliation. Bring us to the present, however you want to cover the gaps to bring us to the present.
Well, that little country church I would remain in for a couple of years. I would actually meet my wife several months later, the one that I've been married to for 26 years now. We didn't have any more kids together, but we got plenty of grandkids, as we've mentioned already. But I would meet my next wife up there, and hopefully my last one. And so, but God continued to grow the church. We took evangelism and the gospel very, very seriously. And I tell about this in the book. When our church was growing, Tom, up there, and it had doubled in size, we went from having absolutely nothing when I got there to having a men's group, a women's group. We had a choir. Remember back in the days when choirs were big, and this and that. Nothing against you churches that have choirs. I mean, just we had a lot of things, and we had a big youth group. Not big, but we had a youth group. And I was in a home one day, and I caught myself selling the church. I was talking about the men's group, the women's group, the choir we had, the children's ministry. And I kid you not, while I was and this was an unsaved couple living together. And I'm really promoting the church. And I sensed the Lord say to me, "What are you doing? What are you doing? When you first got there, you only had me and my son and the one who died and rose again. I like that better. Get back to talking about that." And that moment, Tom, was like an epiphany to me. And it was like God reminded me, he reset me, gave me that true north to say, it doesn't matter if you're in a large church or a little church. If you're the lead guy, you need to lead in the area of soul winning. It doesn't matter whether you're a soul winner or not. Take it as a note of obedience. Out of obedience, preach the gospel, because your people need to know it's coming from the top down. So that's what we did. Our church grew. We tripled, quadrupled in size. And then the church that I currently pastor now for 25 years came after me. They wanted somebody who would present leadership, strong Bible exposition, and a strong sense of gospel-centered ministry. And that's what we brought here in Saylorville Church, where I pastor now and have for 25 years. I mean, you're in California, right? And we're not in Texas here, where if you're not Baptist, somebody's been
messing with. I'm in Tennessee.
You're in Tennessee. Okay. That's still Bible Belt bill, isn't it? So kind of, sort of. But at any rate, our church has gone from about 300 to 1,500 over the last 25 years. And the greatest joy has been replicating ourselves by planting. We've planted 7 churches in the greater Des Moines, Iowa metro with between 4,000 and 5,000 people in all these churches. And all is because we're mentoring men to be gospel centered, come hell or high water. That's what we're doing for the glory of God. And that takes you right up to the present.
That's a good summary. 2 things. You're mentoring men. That's one of the strategies that God has given you that has been fully anointed. And you are making evangelism a priority. I'm going to give you a statistic. One of my sons just tells me I'm so incredibly boring when I start talking about numbers, but I'm going to give you this number. Fewer than 1% of churches in the United States, out of the roughly 400,000, fewer than 1% of the churches have any type of ongoing evangelism emphasis, any type. Fewer than 5% even do one thing a year. So we have anemic evangelism. What do you say to that? I know you're not going to chastise. I know the humility that comes out of your book, but why are we not demonstrating obedience to God's command?
You just said the key word, Tom. I think the answer is obedience, but let's flip it around. It's disobedience. I know we don't want to browbeat our fellow pastors out there who this is not a shot against good theology, Bible exposition, your, whatever seminary or college you're running within your church. Every church has some shtick to it, but if the gospel isn't front and center, and evidently so, because all the churches you referred to, Tom, there isn't anybody who would say they don't believe in preaching the gospel.
True.
But I had the head of a mission agency tell me a couple of years ago, he goes, Pastor, I've been in hundreds and hundreds of churches. He said the highlight for being in the church that day, and I'd preached, this great message. I thought he would talk to me about my finer points of my message. He goes, I'll tell you what, my highlight was the fact that you preached the gospel. I said, I said, well, duh, what are you talking about? He goes, Pat, I'm in hundreds of churches. We could sign their doctrinal statement. They're not preaching the gospel. And that might be the very first thing every listener would do, is ask yourself, do you, as Spurgeon often said, make a beeline to the gospel in every one of your Sunday morning messages? Because if you don't, I think you're being disobedient.
That is such a good word. Man, I wish I had gone to episode 4 and just talked about evangelism with you, because that would have been so helpful. We'll have to have you back.
I'd love to circle back with that one for you, Tom. There'd never be a time.
That would be great. Once again, the book is Retractions. The author is Pat Nemmers. The subtitle, Cultivating Humility After Humiliation. Pat, you were blessed in the first episode where we talked about stupidity in ministry. The second episode was powerful, where you did really almost a monologue on talking about your wife's death and how God showed his mercy and grace during that time. And then we picked it up where we got to this one, where all of a sudden we're talking about the gospel again. So that's a good way to end this podcast. Thank you for being here, Pat. We really have been blessed.
Thank you.
And thank you, Belay. You know what you just did? You got this message out to thousands and thousands and thousands of churches across the United States and across the world about the centrality of the gospel and about the sufficiency of God's grace and so much more. So thank you, Belay, for sponsoring that. Thank you for being the type of organization that wants to get this message out. And thank you for being the organization that helps churches and other organizations to find people in the right place and the right seat on the bus, to use Jim Collins' metaphor. And just thank you for being who you are. Once again, that's Tom at 55123 or THOM at 55123 to get the new book, eBook, The Power of Productivity. As always, thank you for being at Church Answers. The Church Answers podcast is here for you. We seek to serve you who are in the church. And whether you're listening on your favorite podcasting app, or maybe you just go to churchanswers.com and listen, give us a rating and review. Or if you're on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe to us. Let others know about this podcast, because we provide this ministry because of organizations like Belay, and we want it for you. As always, thank you for being here on the Church Answers podcast. Let me remind you once again, we have dropped 3 episodes with Pat Nemmers. We have talked about his book, Retractions, but we've talked about a lot of things. You need to be listening and watching all 3 of those. Until then, we'll see you in the next podcast of the Church Answers podcast.